The generational shift. Transforming Satanism, a deep dive. Intro. What's up, everyone? Today we're diving deep into something that doesn't make the news headlines, doesn't generate protest coverage, and isn't showing up in court battles, but it's absolutely transforming our community from the inside out. We're talking about the generational shift in satanic leadership and practice, the changing of the guard, the passing of the torch. Or, depending on who you ask, either the evolution or the corruption of everything Satanism stands for. This is going to be a long one, because this topic deserves more than surface-level analysis. We're going to break down what's actually changing, why it's happening, what the tensions are, and what it all means for the future of Satanism. So grab your coffee, your ritual beverage of choice, whatever we're going deep. Let's get into it. The old guard, understanding where we came from. To understand where we're going, we need to understand where we came from. The generation that built modern Satanism, we're talking primarily the baby boomers and early Gen X, came up in a completely different world. And I don't just mean technologically, though that's part of it. I mean culturally, socially, legally. When Anton LaVeyan founded the Church of Satan in 1966, being openly satanic wasn't just countercultural. It was genuinely dangerous. You could lose your job. You could lose custody of your kids. You could be physically attacked. There was real risk involved. And that shaped everything about how these organizations were built. The Church of Satan, which remains the oldest and arguably most influential satanic organization, was structured around a very specific philosophy. LaVeyan Satanism is fundamentally individualistic. It's built on social Darwinism, Nietzschean philosophy, Ayn Rand-influenced objectivism. Might is right isn't just a phrase, it's a core principle. The philosophy emphasizes personal power, self-interest, stratification. It explicitly rejects egalitarianism. It's elitist by design. LaVeyan believed that not everyone was cut out for Satanism, that the masses were essentially herd animals, and that Satanists were the elite few who could see through the Christian slave morality that dominated society. And you know what? For its time, for its context, this made sense. These were people who were genuinely standing against massive social pressure. They were saying no to everything their society told them was moral, good, and necessary. They needed a philosophy that justified that stance, that made them feel strong in the face of overwhelming opposition. The gatekeeping wasn't just elitism for its own sake, though there was definitely some of that. It was also protection. If everyone and anyone could claim to be a Satanist, if the label got diluted, if it became just another consumer identity, then it lost its power. It lost its meaning. So the old guard built walls. They created hierarchies. They wrote dense philosophical texts. They made it hard to be a Satanist, both philosophically and socially. And they used provocation, shocking imagery, offensive statements, deliberate blasphemy as both a shield and a weapon. This generation also operated largely in the physical world and through traditional media, books, magazines, in-person meetings, mail correspondence. Information was scarce. You couldn't just Google how to be a Satanist. You had to seek out the books, find the organizations, prove yourself worthy of admission. That scarcity created a certain kind of practitioner, self-selected, determined, often isolated, the kind of person who would go through all that trouble for a philosophy and identity that society violently rejected. Understanding this context is crucial, because when we talk about generational conflict, we're not just talking about age differences. We're talking about fundamentally different lived experiences that shaped fundamentally different approaches to what Satanism is and should be. The new generation, a different world, different values. Now let's talk about millennials and Gen Z in Satanism, because they're a completely different animal. First, the obvious. They grew up with the internet, and I cannot overstate how much this changes everything. For younger Satanists, information has never been scarce. You want to read the Satanic Bible? It's a PDF away. You want to connect with other Satanists? There are Discord servers, Reddit communities, TikTok creators, Instagram pages, YouTube channels. You want to see what a satanic ritual looks like? There's video. The gatekeeping that the old guard saw as essential protection, younger practitioners see as arbitrary elitism. Why should access to ideas be restricted? Why should community be something you have to earn through proving your philosophical purity? But it goes deeper than just access to information. The younger generation came of age in a different social and political context. They grew up during the rise of social media and participatory culture. They're used to having a voice, to being able to contribute to conversations, to collaborative creation. The top-down hierarchical structure of traditional satanic organizations feels authoritarian to them, which is ironic, given that Satanism is supposed to be about rebellion against authority. They came of age during a time of massive social movements: Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, climate activism. They've seen what collective action can accomplish. The rugged individualism of LaVeyan philosophy feels not just outdated, but actively harmful to many of them. They're more diverse. This generation of Satanists includes way more women, way more LGBTQ+ folks, way more people of color than the predominantly white, predominantly male old guard. And they bring different perspectives, different priorities, different needs. And critically, being satanic doesn't carry the same social risk it used to. Don't get me wrong, there are still places where it's dangerous, still contexts where you need to be careful. But in many urban areas, in many social circles, being a Satanist is weird, but not career-ending. It's provocative, but not life-destroying. When you don't have to risk everything just to identify as satanic, the psychology changes. You don't need the same defensive structures. You don't need the same us versus them mentality. You can approach it differently. So what does this younger generation want from Satanism? Community, support, activism. They want Satanism to do something, not just be something. They want it to be a force for social change. They see it as compatible with, even aligned with, progressive politics, social justice, collective liberation. They're comfortable with identity politics. They talk about intersectionality, about diversity and inclusion, about accessibility. They want satanic spaces to actively welcome people who've been marginalized, not just tolerate them. They reject social Darwinism. The might is right philosophy feels fascistic to them. They're more likely to emphasize consent, bodily autonomy, mutual aid, community care. And they're way more comfortable with sincerity. The ironic distance, the constant provocation, the shock tactics of the old guard feel performative to them. They want authenticity, even if that authenticity is less edgy. Where the tension lives. So now we have two generations with fundamentally different ideas about what Satanism is, should be, and should do. And they're colliding in every space where Satanists gather. Let me give you some concrete examples of where this plays out. Language and rhetoric. The older generation tends to use language that's deliberately provocative, sometimes offensive. They'll use terms that younger folks consider slurs, not because they're necessarily bigoted, but because they reject political correctness as a form of social control. They see this as staying true to Satanism's transgressive roots. The younger generation sees this differently. They argue that you can be transgressive without being needlessly harmful, that using slurs isn't rebellious, it's just being an asshole. That language evolves, and we should evolve with it. This creates real friction. Older Satanists accuse younger ones of being woke, of importing social justice politics where they don't belong, of being too sensitive, of prioritizing feelings over philosophical rigor. Younger Satanists accuse older ones of being stuck in the past, of confusing edginess with depth, of hiding behind philosophy to avoid accountability for harm, of being reactionary rather than truly radical. Organizational structure. The older organizations tend to be hierarchical. The Church of Satan has a formal hierarchy of degrees. Even less structured groups often have clear leadership, formal membership requirements, codes of conduct that emphasize authority. Younger practitioners are more interested in horizontal organization, collective decision-making, consent-based governance. They want democratic structures, or at least structures where leadership is accountable to members. The older generation sees this as naive, as destined to fail through lowest common denominator thinking. They believe hierarchy is natural and necessary. The younger generation sees the old model as reproducing the authoritarian structures Satanism is supposed to oppose. Activism versus philosophy. This might be the biggest divide. The Satanic Temple, which is newer and tends to attract younger members, has made political activism central to its mission. Abortion rights, church-state separation, religious pluralism. They're filing lawsuits, organizing protests, doing direct political action. The Church of Satan explicitly rejects this approach. They maintain that Satanism is a philosophy, not a political movement. That individual Satanists can do whatever politics they want, but the organization shouldn't be activist. Younger practitioners, even outside TST, tend to see activism as essential. How can you claim to oppose oppression, to stand for individual freedom, to fight against authoritarian control, and then do nothing politically? Philosophy without action is just aesthetics. Older practitioners argue that turning Satanism into an activist movement dilutes it. That once you're organizing collective action toward political goals, you've abandoned the core individualism that makes Satanism distinct. That you've become just another social movement wearing occult aesthetics. Both sides have points. Both sides are also talking past each other sometimes. Social media and public presentation. The younger generation is way more active on platforms like TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. They're creating content, building audiences, putting their faces and names out there. The older generation is more cautious, more private. They came up in a time when exposure was dangerous. They value discretion. This creates different approaches to what it means to be publicly satanic. Younger folks are doing get ready with me for ritual videos, posting their altars, talking about their practice openly and casually. Older practitioners see this as cheapening it, as making it all about performance and aesthetics rather than genuine practice, as Satanism becoming content rather than conviction. Younger practitioners see the older generation as gatekeeping, as acting like Satanism is some precious secret that needs to be protected from the masses. The Church of Satan versus the Satanic Temple. We need to talk about this specifically because it embodies the generational divide perfectly. The Church of Satan, founded in 1966, represents the old guard. LaVeyan philosophy, explicit hierarchy, philosophical rather than activist orientation, emphasis on individual achievement, and social Darwinism. The Satanic Temple, founded in 2013, represents the new approach. Activist orientation, relatively flat structure, emphasis on social justice and collective action, rejection of social Darwinism in favor of values like compassion and empathy. And these organizations hate each other, like genuinely, publicly, viciously dislike each other. The Church of Satan accuses TST of not being real Satanists, of being political activists cosplaying as Satanists for attention, of misunderstanding what Satanism fundamentally is, of being woke infiltrators diluting the philosophy. The Satanic Temple accuses COS of being stuck in the past, of hiding behind philosophy to avoid actually doing anything meaningful, of social Darwinism being a cover for reactionary politics, of being more interested in maintaining their own authority than actually challenging power. And you know what? They're both right and both wrong. COS is correct that TST has a fundamentally different approach to what Satanism is. TST is explicitly activist in a way LaVeyan never intended Satanism to be. Their emphasis on social justice, inclusivity, and collective action is different from traditional Satanic philosophy. But TST is correct that COS's individualism can become an excuse for inaction. That social Darwinism has uncomfortable parallels with right-wing ideology. That philosophy without application is just intellectual masturbation. The conflict between these organizations is basically a proxy war for the generational conflict in the broader community. And practitioners are forced to pick sides or to try to navigate a middle path that satisfies no one. What's actually at stake? Let's get real about what we're actually arguing about here, because it's not just aesthetics or tactics, it's fundamental questions about what Satanism is. Is Satanism primarily a philosophy or a religion? The older generation leans toward philosophy, a way of thinking, a set of principles. The younger generation is more comfortable treating it as a religion, something that informs all aspects of life, including politics and community. Is Satanism inherently individualistic, or can it be collective? The older generation says individualism is essential, that collectivism is antithetical to Satanic principles. The younger generation argues that you can value individual autonomy, while also recognizing that we accomplish more together. Is Satanism transgressive for its own sake, or transgressive in service of something? The older generation values transgression as rebellion against social control. The younger generation wants transgression that serves concrete goals, liberation, justice, freedom. Is Satanism exclusive or inclusive? Should it be for the elite few who can handle it, or should it be accessible to anyone drawn to it? Should there be gatekeeping, or should the gates be thrown open? These aren't small questions. These are questions about fundamental identity. And here's the uncomfortable truth. There might not be one answer. Satanism might be fragmenting into multiple distinct traditions that share aesthetic elements and historical roots, but have fundamentally different values and goals. We might be watching Satanism go through the same kind of splintering that Christianity went through, that Buddhism went through, that every major religious or philosophical tradition goes through as it ages and spreads. Why this is actually healthy. Here's my controversial take. This generational conflict, as messy and uncomfortable as it is actually a sign of health. Because the alternative is stagnation. The alternative is Satanism becoming a historical curiosity, a thing that happened in the 60s and 70s and then ossified into irrelevance. Every movement that survives has to adapt to new generations. It has to allow new interpretations, new applications, new voices. If it can't do that, it dies. Look at what happens to movements that refuse to evolve. They become museums. They become reenactment societies. People study them as history, not as living traditions. Is that what we want for Satanism? For it to be something people look back on and say, oh yeah, that was a thing in the 20th century. The generational conflict means Satanism is alive. It means young people care enough to fight about it. It means the tradition is being challenged, questioned, reinterpreted, all of which are fundamentally satanic activities. Yes, some changes might betray core principles. Yes, some adaptations might dilute what makes Satanism distinct. These are legitimate concerns. But the "this isn't how we've always done it" argument has killed more movements than it's saved. Tradition for tradition's sake is exactly the kind of dogmatic thinking Satanism is supposed to oppose. The key is figuring out what's essential, what actually makes Satanism Satanism, versus what's historical contingency that can change. Is individualism essential, or can we have forms of Satanism that value individual autonomy within collective structures? Is social Darwinism essential, or was that LaVeyan's personal philosophy that doesn't have to bind everyone who comes after? Is shock value essential, or can we be transgressive in different ways? These are hard questions. They should be hard questions, and we should be having loud, messy, uncomfortable arguments about them. Because that's how traditions stay relevant, through conflict, through adaptation, through new generations demanding that the traditions serve their needs, not just replicate the past. What needs to happen next? So where do we go from here? How do we navigate this generational transition in a way that preserves what's valuable while allowing necessary evolution? First, we need more intergenerational dialogue. And I mean actual dialogue, not just people talking past each other or dismissing each other. The older generation has institutional knowledge, historical context, and hard-won wisdom about what works and what doesn't. The younger generation has fresh perspectives, new tools, and an understanding of the current social and technological landscape. Neither side has all the answers. Both sides need each other. Second, we need to be more honest about what's actually core to Satanism versus what's negotiable. The older generation sometimes treats everything LaVeyan said as sacred text. The younger generation sometimes acts like nothing from the past is worth preserving. Both approaches are wrong. We need to be able to say, yes, this principle is fundamental and non-negotiable, and yes, this aspect can be adapted or even abandoned. Third, we need space for multiple expressions of Satanism to coexist without constant warfare. The Church of Satan doesn't have to become activist. The Satanic Temple doesn't have to adopt LaVeyan social Darwinism. Theistic Satanists don't have to justify themselves to atheistic ones. We can have different traditions under the broader umbrella of Satanism. We can disagree about fundamentals while still recognizing each other as legitimate. Fourth, we need to be careful about reproducing the same authoritarian structures we claim to oppose, whether that's the old guard refusing to allow criticism or change, or the new guard creating purity tests and cancel culture within satanic spaces. If we're going to claim that Satanism is about individual freedom, about questioning authority, about thinking for yourself, then we need to walk that talk in how we treat each other. Finally, we need to keep the focus on action and practice, not just rhetoric. It's easy to argue about philosophy. It's harder to build something real, something that serves actual needs, something that makes a difference in people's lives. Whether that's the Church of Satan's approach of individual philosophical development, or the Satanic Temple's approach of political activism, or smaller groups doing community mutual aid, or individual practitioners developing their personal practice, we need to be doing things, not just fighting about who's doing it right. Conclusion: the generational shift in Satanism is real. It's happening right now. It's transforming our organizations, our communities, our public image, and our fundamental understanding of what Satanism is and can be. The older generation built something valuable under incredibly difficult circumstances. They created the foundation we're all standing on. That deserves respect and gratitude, even when we disagree with specific aspects of what they built. The younger generation is bringing new energy, new perspectives, and new possibilities. They're expanding what Satanism can be and who it can serve. That deserves support and space to experiment, even when it makes traditionalists uncomfortable. The conflict between these generations is going to define what Satanism looks like for the next 30 years. How we navigate this conflict, whether we can find ways to bridge differences while maintaining distinct traditions, whether we can have productive disagreement without destructive warfare, that's going to determine whether Satanism thrives or fractures beyond recognition. My hope? That we can hold space for multiple expressions of Satanism, that the Church of Satan can continue representing its traditional philosophical approach while the Satanic Temple does its activist work, while theistic practitioners develop their devotional practices, while new expressions we haven't even imagined yet emerge. My fear? That we'll get so caught up in fighting about who's doing it right, that we'll destroy the community entirely, that the generational conflict will become so toxic that young people stop caring and old people become increasingly bitter and isolated. But ultimately, I'm optimistic, because this conflict means people care. It means Satanism matters enough to fight about, and anything that matters enough to fight about is alive. So to the older generation, thank you for building this. Your courage and commitment made everything we have possible, and also, let the younger folks experiment. Let them make mistakes. Let them build something new. That's what you did once. To the younger generation, learn from those who came before. Don't dismiss their wisdom just because they're old. And also, keep pushing, keep questioning, keep building the Satanism you need for the world you're living in. That's what they did once. And to everyone, remember that we're all here because we said no to someone else's authority over our beliefs, our bodies, our lives. Let's not become the new authority figures telling others how they're allowed to be satanic. The generational transition is happening. The question isn't whether it's happening, it's how we're going to navigate it. And that's up to all of us. Hail yourself, hail the old guard, hail the new blood, and hail the messy, uncomfortable, necessary process of evolution. That's it for today. Let me know in the comments. What generation are you? How do you see this transition? Where do you stand on these questions? Let's have an actual conversation. Until next time.